Hello, everyone. Today is part 2 in the JonBenét case, and we're putting it all together. Sources presented fall under the Fair Use in the Copyright Act. This episode is called Occam's Razor, which means the simplest solution is typically the correct one. My name is Marcel Elvers. I'm a master profiler through written communication, an Enneagram expert, and questioned document examiner. I authored the book Handwriting Analysis Principles, available on Amazon. My multi-year investigation, and on request, I wrote the book JonBenét, the final chapter. Please see the link in the bio. The subtitle, The Final Chapter, refers to my final conclusion, and I'm basically done with investigating this case. And although we may never know exactly what happened, I do believe the events on the evening of December 25th to December 26th were accidental. The final chapter also refers to the Ramseys having suffered enough. In episode 1, I showed how the evidence points overwhelmingly to Patsy. First and foremost, her handwriting matches the author of the ransom note. The language in the note suggests she knew JonBenét was dead already, and she coerced John into cooperation. And lastly, both John and Patsy showed an increase in anxiety whenever Patsy's involvement was brought up in interviews, but not when Burke was taken into consideration as a suspect. Besides, Burke went unsupervised to school after the Christmas vacation, suggesting Burke did not know what happened. The question now is, why write a note? Why coercing John? What was the strong incentive to cover up this tragic event? Another question that lingers is, did Patsy suffer from a personality disorder with a Jekyll and Hyde personality? Did she, for instance, have borderline personality disorder with the common dissociative identity disorder attached to it, which is caused by splitting? I'm not going to speculate in that direction, although it is a possible explanation for the sudden change in behavior. The following proposed scenario is a viable one, but not necessarily the correct one. Keep an open mind, but yet the scenario that follows in this presentation will answer many, if not all, questions regarding why she wrote the note, why the Ramseys limited their cooperation, and why the 911 call, as well as their consequent behaviors, were odd. After a fun-filled Christmas day visiting friends, they came home around 10 p.m. Reportedly, JonBenét was asleep and carried upstairs. From here on, it is unclear from reporting what happened. They were going to leave in a private plane the next day, around 7 a.m. This is an important time frame because they would be forced to get up early. This limited time frame limited the fabrication of a storyline, writing the ransom note, and their ability to remove the body from the home. I suspect that Patsy, the ever-helpful wife and mother, likely was gathering some stuff, getting ready for the following day. She walked upstairs and walked in on John and JonBenét. Patsy interprets that behavior as inappropriate and instantly enraged swings at John with the force to hit an adult. Of course, John evades the blow and JonBenét gets struck. The accidental death scenario explains a lot of the odd behaviors and the word selections they used, like tragedy, why this happened, and calling the murderer an intruder. So what I picture is that JonBenét could have been sitting on John's lap, facing him. Patsy is an emotional and reactive woman who comes into action when wrongs are done. This instant reaction is understandable, and even more understandable if Patsy suffered from childhood abuse herself. We all know borderline personality, if she suffered from that, has childhood abuse as one of the main causes. But let us not speculate, as we are not in the position to determine whether there was a personality disorder in play. So, she instantly swung at John, and John, holding JonBenét, evades the blow, and JonBenét gets accidentally struck. She screams, is instantly unconscious, and she goes limp. They heard the loud crack during the impact, and they believe she is dead. They cannot believe what just happened. Their minds are now in overdrive, and they accuse each other. Patsy accuses John of incest, and John accuses Patsy of the overreaction while nothing happened. John evaded the blow to his right and JonBenét's left. This is why the crack on the skull is on the right-hand side, as she was struck from the back. And Patsy was right-handed, and the crack in the skull is therefore a natural position. There was only one blow to her head. Forensic examiners tell us that one blow with a blunt object does not break the skin, while a second and consequent blows will break the skin and create spatter patterns. John veered toward his right and JonBenét's left, and JonBenét, now unconscious, lost sphincter control. The urine stain in her underwear and pants soiled towards her left. John's evasive action was quick, and she came down before her bladder was emptied. Patsy was a loving and caring mother who lived vicariously through her daughter. Patsy was also an ovarian cancer survivor and, like John said in an interview, wanted to pack as much time with her daughter as she could. Her fear for not being long on Earth was likely her motivation. The interesting part of the impact is twofold. First, I cannot fathom that Patsy, as a caring mother, would strike her child with a heavy object just for bedwetting. Second, to hit her from behind is completely incomprehensible. It makes far more sense that if Patsy lost control, she would have slapped JonBenét with an open hand on the cheek. I want to make very clear that it is unlikely actual inappropriate behavior happened, although we cannot exclude it. Patsy coerced John, and his hesitant cooperation suggests Patsy knew something significant about him. Yet, there is no history of sexual abuse, and John's other children stated as much. Second, her private parts were hyperemic, and that was evidenced by some red blood cells. And there was some foreign material. Penetration, however, most likely did not occur. Whether incest occurred or not is factually irrelevant. What matters is Patsy believed what she saw was incestuous, and somebody looked up the definition of incest. The Merriam-Webster dictionary on the coffee table had its page sharply creased and pointing like an arrow to the word incest. Now we can say, well, adults know what incest is. But I had to look up the actual definition myself. I asked myself, does incest have to include penetration, for instance? Also remember, the Ramseys were at that time in a panic mode, and most likely Patsy looked up the definition to see whether John's behavior was befitting the definition. And so incest is sexual intercourse between persons closely related, that they are forbidden by law to marry, while intercourse is physical sexual contact between individuals that involves the genitalia of at least one person. This suggests penetration is not necessary for incest to occur. There is another more important conclusion to be drawn from looking up the word incest. It is between family members or closely related family that in and by itself excludes a random intruder. A parent would not look up incest if a stranger would have taken her. The no intruder concept is supported by Locard's principle. There was zero evidence an intruder was in the home. The foundation of the intruder theory is weak. It is not only weak, it is also based on unreasonable and increasingly unlikely events. The explanation a stranger was in the home defies all logic. This theory is stitched together to fit a false narrative. Only the esoteric conspiracy theorists who are convinced the parents could not possibly have done this. I'd like to remind everyone of Susan Smith, who drove her two young sons tied up in her car into a lake, drowning them just to be with her boyfriend. Infanticide happens all too often. And this accidental scenario explains John's comment. But the other reason is that for our grief to resolve itself, we now have to find out why this happened. We cannot go on until we know why. There is no answer as to why our daughter died. Asking why is about motivation, while asking what happened would lead to the murderer. The question why also implies he did not understand why Patsy thought it was incestuous and why she lost control and swung at him. Of course, we may never know. The sentence, "There is no answer as to why our daughter died," is also a mindset expressed. He is telling us there is no answer. Thus, there is no need to look for one. The lack of prioritizing finding the murderer in combination with why this happened and downplaying the murderer to intruder and later on this person, while the murder was called a tragedy, shows they knew what happened and there was no intent to kill their daughter. After all, the word tragedy implies it was indeed an accident, and downplaying a willful act is to reduce feelings of guilt and responsibility. Ergo, the Ramseys were involved. Of course, the main piece of evidence is the rambling 2.5-page ransom note and explains their lack of cooperation with law enforcement, their need to immediately lawyer up, why there was zero evidence of an intruder, why Patsy did not prioritize the victim in the 911 call, why the 911 operator said she felt the call was rehearsed, and why John thanked the public first and foremost for their support in the January 1st, 1997, 5 days after the murder, in the CNN interview, instead of demanding answers and public assistance. Patsy was an ovarian cancer survivor, and she accidentally hit JonBenét and killed her. This is why she was the most motivated to write the note, and she did write the rambling ransom note. This is why the handwriting is a match. Again, remember, Patsy is a loving and caring mother who, as an Enneagram Type 2, is prone to provide unwanted advice. And so, in her highly agitated and emotionally overreactive state, she writes things that do not make sense, like advising sleeping parents to rest. Patsy was an emotional, reactive woman, and in that state, all reasoning and logic goes out the window. This is why the note is long and rambling, and why the note has many mistakes, showing the writer did not have a kidnapper's mindset. No kidnapper has the mindset to deliver a child and take the risk to be caught. This mistake and the change from delivery to pickup is telling a whole lot about the incompetence of Patsy as the kidnapper, and being in a situation she basically cannot imagine nor handle. This scenario also explains the high levels of anxiety in the writing and why it was written on a notepad with a Sharpie belonging in the home. The emotional impact the writing had on the author is now also understandable. A mother just accidentally killed her daughter. She feels she had a good reason to swing at John, but now needs to cover up because she does not want to go to prison and be without medical care for the return of her ovarian cancer. The word unharmed with undetouched and harmed cramped up strongly suggests Patsy knew the child had passed away during the time of writing the note. Patsy was utterly devastated. Patsy must have gone through the grieving process, which starts with denial and is followed by anger. The second half of the second page shows she is now entering the anger stage and writes about how the child may die trying to uphold the image of a kidnapper. This obsessive and compulsive behavior shows a beheading, 4 times the word dies, and it is easy to kill her. This woman is absolutely devastated and certainly not a cold-hearted killer who punished her daughter over bedwetting. Certainly not with a heavy object hitting her from behind. This is one of the many reasons why I strongly believe something happened and she swung at John with the force meant for an adult. In the Larry King interview, some 3 years after the events, Steve Thomas, the lead investigator, and the Ramseys met. Patsy stated in that interview wholeheartedly and with conviction, whoever wrote the note is the killer. And yes, I believe she meant herself while pointing to an alleged intruder. So, why was her body left in the home? And Patsy still demanded the ransom. This actually makes a lot of sense with their plan in mind. Place yourself in their shoes. They are utterly panicked, had no idea what to do. The events were not anticipated, and they cannot believe the situation they found themselves in. It is clear from the ransom note that Patsy was the most motivated and coerced and hesitant John into cooperation. As a reminder, the stages of the grieving process are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. At that night, they are in the denial stage, which for Patsy developed into anger on the 2nd page of the ransom note. Patsy coerced John because the ransom note is addressed to Mr. Ramsey, started with demands and ends up with, "It's all up to you now, John." The last page is her last-ditch effort to control John. "Do not grow a brain or I will tell. I will rat you out. It is up to you now, John." In the end, it is John who needs to decide their future. And with a sigh, Patsy, known for her use of acronyms, writes "Victory!" reflecting on hope to successfully execute their plan. She knows, however, she will not be able to control John in the future and realizes whatever happens, happens. It's out of my control. She signs off with SBTC, or "so be the case." The core of the note is actually quite simple and is filled with double meanings. It is supposedly a ransom note demand by kidnappers, while John is warned on a personal level. The first page shows the warning to Mr. Ramsey. He had to listen carefully. The 2nd page is the reason for the warning. Your situation not only refers to the kidnapping of JonBenét, but since they know she is in the basement, it also refers to the incest accusation hanging over his head. And the last page shows John had to decide how to move forward. "Don't grow a brain, John, or I will accuse you of incest." And so the note has basically 3 parts: the demands on the first place, the hedging on the 2nd page, and the pleading on the 3rd page. We can see from this summary there was a balance of power between John and Patsy. Patsy killed, and John stood to be accused of incest. In the note, however, the balance of power shifted from Patsy to John. it's up to John to decide in the end. So what was their plan? The plan was to fabricate a kidnapping storyline. Kidnappers would tie her up, place duct tape on her mouth to prevent her from screaming, and take her away. The duct tape on her mouth is interesting in and by itself. You see, the lip prints were perfect, and typically a child with duct tape move their mouth around. And so the perfect lip prints suggest that the tape was placed after her demise. Why would a kidnapper do that? Why the garret? Well, her body was supposed to have been taken by the kidnappers to be found later at an alternative location. Helaas, they had a flight at 7 a.m. and their pilot would have found it odd if they did not show or canceled during the night and before they supposedly found the ransom note. If they canceled the flight, the pilot would testify that the Ramseys canceled during the night, and the question then is, why? What did they know? This flight plan restricted their time frame. The Ramseys either ran out of time or JonBenét did not fit in the suitcase because maybe a rigor mortis had already set in. Or maybe it was emotionally too difficult for them to throw their baby girl outside like trash. Regardless of the reason, her body was found in the basement. Another potential reason is if they leave her outside and if she was not found, she would not get a quote-unquote proper burial. The quote-unquote kidnappers would later supposedly be angered for not receiving the dismal 118,000 ransom and execute her, as the excessive warnings show in the last page, in the second page of the ransom note. The body was found in the basement. Patsy knew JonBenét was dead while writing the note, and the second page with the excessive death threats is now the alleged kidnapper's reason why she had to die. Patsy simply predicted a known outcome. In summary, it is a viable scenario that has been presented. An accident happened. Patsy did not want to go to prison because of health issues. She coerced John with the threat of incest. And above all, nobody looks up the word incest if an intruder, a non-family member, had taken her. There was no intruder. May Patsy and JonBenét rest in peace.